The Occupy movement has timed today's general strike in the U.S. to coincide with May Day. So what does this say about the relationship between the Occupy movement and the labor movement? And where does the Occupy movement go from here? Here to discuss more is activist and writer Jesse LaGreca from our New York studio. Jesse, so we've all heard about the foiled terror plot in Cleveland, about the bridge blow-up. Is the FBI looking for you for any terrorist plots?
I should hope not. I'm not anybody important myself, so I find it a little laughable, you know?
It is interesting that that is, you know, they're tying him to the Occupy Wall Street movement, really making that the forefront of that headline. Jesse, where do you see the Occupy movement going from here in light of all these federalized crackdowns and now, you know, finally May Day? Do we have a reemergence of the Occupy movement?
I would hope so. I mean, look at the problems that we face in this country. It's not like they're going away. And part of the reason that we need an active Occupy Wall Street movement is because our political leaders aren't addressing these problems either. One party likes to blame the president for high unemployment when they have no plan whatsoever to address it, whereas the Democratic Party is declaring recovery already taking place. Wall Street's recovered, so it'll trickle down to the rest of us eventually. And I think with the dearth of reality in the political conversation in America, we need to be out in the street pressuring our political leaders to do something that benefits the working class people as opposed to something that benefits the rich and the rich first.
So, but, you know, we've seen with the NYPD making up these random laws and the eviction theater going on every night at midnight in Union Square. I mean, what's going to happen after May Day? I mean, thousands of people aren't going to be in the street anymore, and is there just going to be a small group of people still doing these small-scale actions? And in the light of this police state force, you would say, what can happen, really?
Well, I think that it's not an easy struggle, but it's one that absolutely has to happen. And I don't think you're going to see, like, live-in occupations the way we had it during the fall. It's just not viable. But I would like to see large targeted protests against specific individuals who are frankly creating the problem, whether it's a large financial institution, these too-big-to-fail corporations, or even our government itself. You know, many of our elected officials simply are not doing their jobs if you consider their job to be fighting for regular people. So I see the movement going forward in ways that we have yet to conceive, but with the same intention each time, applying pressure to the powerful and demanding a side that benefits all of us.
Jesse, the majority, the overwhelming majority of the Occupy Wall Street movement across the nation has been remarkably peaceful, other than these very small select group of people who are breaking windows and such. So why is the establishment so afraid of a bunch of peaceful people getting together in a public space to discuss things?
Because they absolutely do not want to have this conversation. You know, I've had a couple people ask me about the meatheads out in Ohio who I have no idea what they were doing, planning to blow up a bridge or something like that. Now imagine if every time the press addressed the Republican senatorial leadership, imagine if they asked every single time about David Vitter, the Louisiana senator who sleeps with prostitutes while wearing diapers. If they brought that up every time they mentioned the Republican Party and their minority control of the Senate, it would be difficult to have a conversation going forward if you were a Republican senator. Same thing for Occupy. Instead of discussing the growing income inequality in America, the growing poverty, the death of the middle class, or the amazing wealth that the 1% now enjoy today, they would rather talk about an arrest or some unrelated idiots out in Ohio or whatever else might be going on. The fact of the matter is that the conversation we're having about the control that corporations have over our government and the many different facets of society, the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about it. So they're just going to distract and troll and talk about anything else.
Jesse, I wanted to read a quote really quickly from Noam Chomsky, who wrote about today's actions. He said, if you get to a point where the existing institutions will not bend to popular will, you then have to eliminate the institutions. What do you think about that quote? I mean, do you think that the institutions will bend to popular will? And if not, what needs to happen for us to really make ourselves heard?
At a certain point, the system breaks down. It just breaks down. Now, our founding fathers intended that we should have a constitutional convention every few years. They thought that the Constitution is something that should be reviewed and updated. I would like to see a citizens' constitutional convention, even if it was kind of like a mock one, just to have a large conversation. Now, whether the functions of government change to meet the needs of the people or not, change is going to happen whether you like it or not. Some people have dug their heels in since the president said that, and one of them is the president. So I think we need to really demand a major major systemic change, whether it's the way our financial institution operate, the way our campaign finance system works, or a number of different pressing issues that are really weighing down on the public today. That change is going to happen whether it's in a little shift and a little nudge or, you know, a systemic change overnight. It's going to happen, and people on the street demanding it.
But how can it happen if both political parties are completely bought out by the same corporate establishment that the Occupy movement's fighting against? It just seems really like a pie-in-the-sky idea to just say, you know, get money out of politics when it's so entrenched. How is it possible at this point to work within the institution and within the establishment to create this change unless you're working outside of it?
Well, to me, one thing that I really enjoy about Occupy Wall Street is that it's a stark reminder that in order to participate in our democracy, it's not once every 2 years where you go into a ballot box. You need to be participating on every level that you have. The more democracy, the better. So take Grover Norquist, for instance. He came up with his no tax pledge, and he demands that each and every single Republican and Democrat who's willing to do so sign his pledge to never raise taxes on the rich. But what if we had something similar to that on the other side? What if we had a pledge where we went to the congressman and said, hey, who do you stand for? Who do you work with? The working class and the average person, or the special interests that fund your campaigns? Maybe we should put these guys on the spot. Now, some people within Occupy Wall Street would say that's too reformist. We need something more radical. Some people would say that's exactly what we need. I'm not the one to judge that, but I think it's one avenue that we can take among many that we should to throttle the system in a way that makes it work for us instead of just for the rich.
Yeah, and obviously this movement is not going away, as a lot of naysayers like to say that it was over, you know, the winter shut us down and all that. It looks like it's just beginning, Jesse. And I wanted to talk really briefly about NATO and G8. A lot of people in the Occupy movement were saying that this was going to be an enormous pivotal point to retake, the Occupy movement in Chicago. And then you have the establishment moving the G8 to Camp David. I mean, do you think that this is a trend that we're going to see to kind of squelch protests altogether?
Oh, absolutely. The one thing that the elite do not want is this conversation. So they're going to move it into a place that's not easy to access for the average person. You know, let's remember, after the events that took place in Seattle in 1999, a lot of the G8, or I think it was G20, G8, they moved to third world countries, particularly third world countries that don't very highly value freedom of speech. They don't want this conversation. So it strikes me as no surprise that the G8 summit that was to take place in Chicago got moved to Camp David. It looks awfully bad for capitalism when you have to beat your citizens in order to make them accept it, doesn't it?
It does. Thanks, Jesse. That was Jesse LaGreca, an activist and writer at Daily Kos, and we'll definitely keep following this conversation and keep following the movement as it unfolds.